Hey everybody, and welcome back to my podcast, Going Down the Road with Randy. Tonight we're going to the better known of the lands down under, Australia, where we'll be driving around in Stella Blue, our camper van, and backpacking in the Carnarvon Gorge in what is known as the Inner West in Queensland. Afterwards, we'll be going on a couple of liveaboard scuba diving trips on the Great Barrier Reef. Australia, land of Oz, down under. It's about the size of the U.S. in land area, but it has something like 1/12 of the people. Most of it is a whole lot of nothing. Well, no, not absolutely nothing. It has heaps of minerals and ores, precious gems. Fun fact, most of the world's opals come from mines at Cooper Pedy in South Australia. We arrived in Australia on January 15th, 1991. We were just about dead broke, and it was just before the first Gulf War when we invaded Kuwait. We get a job working illegally in a cafe in Bondi Beach, and we managed to save enough money to finally buy a 1972 VW Combi camper van. It will sleep 4 people, 2 up top and 2 down below. It has a sink and a nifty 3-way refrigerator, which can run off a 12-volt battery, plug it in, or it can run on propane. It also has a 2-burner stove, stereo, a dash-mounted oscillating fan, and the previous owners are throwing in all kinds of beach equipment, a propane lantern, and a tent. They had the engine replaced, and there are only 4,000 miles on the new engine. The worst thing was the Carolina blue color, but we got over it. It would be our home for the next 3 months. Finally, on June 13th, we left Sydney with our friends Mike and Elliot on board. Elliot is the guy to whom we had bequeathed our car to in New Zealand, and Mike is a mellow young hippie dude that we had also traveled with in New Zealand. Both are from the California Bay Area. We leave New South Wales with over 3 cases of wine as ballast under the rear seat, which is another story all its own. That's kind of the issue I have in telling stories about Australia. It is so big and we were there for so long. All of the stories become rather long. So I'm going to skip ahead to Queensland, which is not to say that there are no cool things to do in New South Wales, but this is already going to be a long episode, so we'll just have to revisit those adventures some other time. Queensland is the Australian state which occupies the northeast of the country and is just north of New South Wales. It arguably has all the good stuff. Thousands of miles of coral reefs, islands, surfing, sailing, tropical rainforests, volcanoes, Aboriginal rock art, along with vibrant cities and modern amenities. Ask almost anyone to list 10 things to see and do in Australia, and you'll probably get something along these lines. The Great Barrier Reef, of course, Sydney Opera House, Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Blue Mountains, Kakadu National Park, Fraser Island, Cooktown, Uluru, which you may know as Ayers Rock, Brisbane, Melbourne, Cairns, and maybe various other tourist destinations mixed in. We did most of those and more. We were blessed with time, a Volkswagen camper van, and a keen nose for shit off the beaten track. That's how we discovered Carnarvon Gorge. Actually, truth be told, I think we discovered Carnarvon Gorge by seeing it in the Lonely Planet Guide to Australia, but it sounded remote and intriguing, so we went. 30 kilometers long and 200 meters high in places, the Carnarvon Gorge cuts a fissure through the landscape of east-central Queensland. It was carved over countless centuries by Carnarvon Creek and its tributaries. It is similar in many ways to the canyons of the desert's southwest U.S., but with much more vegetation. The gorge is mostly open, but some of the side canyons soon become little slot canyons with beautiful hidden twists and turns. Getting there meant driving 350 miles west of Gladstone on Route 60. The closest town is the hopeful-sounding Springshore. It's amazing how once you leave the east coast of Australia, you very quickly enter a whole other world. The road soon becomes a 1-lane paved road with gravel shoulders on either side. Mostly it runs straight through grassy plains. The local etiquette is that you drive on the paved part until you meet a car coming the other way, and then you slow down and you each drop your right wheels onto the gravel and keep the left wheels on the paved road and pass each other that way. If by chance there's a truck coming the other way, slow down, pull completely off the road, because if he goes on the gravel, it's going to spew masses of windshield cracking gravel all over the place. We wake up in Stella in a very cool little park on the edge of the small hamlet of Biloela, Queensland. Often, if we were driving, we would just stop at a nice-looking park and pop the top of Stella, cook up some dinner, and crash out. Only a couple of places in Australia had a problem with us sleeping in our van in parks at night. I think perhaps if we had overstayed our welcome, we might have had more problems, but a night or two seemed to be okay. And that worked out well for us, actually, because after a night or two, we needed to restock with water and charge batteries. Many of the little municipal parks on the ocean coming up the east coast from Sydney are the best waterside property in the world, and we were enjoying dinner, sleeping, and making breakfast right there for free. Bear in mind, this was in 1991, and I have no idea what it's like there now, but I'd like to think it was the same. We scoured the small town looking for fuel for our backpacking stove. We know it as white gas, or Coleman fuel, but we had learned in Oz they call it shellite. There was none in Biloela, so we kept heading west, and thankfully found some in Rolleston. Good thing, too, because that was the next to last chance to buy some. We also splurged on a case, or a slab of stubbies, of the dominant Queensland beer known as 4X. The last 70 kilometers to Carnarvon Gorge is over a washboard dirt road that seems endless at 40 kilometers an hour. We arrive in late afternoon to, quote-unquote, find the kind campsite surrounded by friendly kangaroos and oldies from Tasmania and Victoria. We cook up a good feed and sleep well. That was from my journal. The next day, we pack backpacks and hike 6 miles up to Big Bend campsite. In the 6 or so miles, the trail crosses Carnarvon Creek 20 times. Or does Carnarvon Creek cross the trail 20 times? I fear that it really doesn't matter. Other than the stream crossings, which aren't really all that bad, the trail is wide and level and easy walking. As beautiful as the main gorge is, the truly spectacular attractions are the side gorges. We check out places called the Moss Garden and the Amphitheater, accessed by a steel ladder and a slot in the rocks. We enjoy lunch in its cool, dark, and shady interior. Just before we reach the campsite at Big Bend, we stop at Cathedral Cove and get our first look at some ancient Aboriginal rock art. The art on the rocks here is estimated to be 3,650 years old. Areas of Carnarvon National Park have evidence of human habitation going back almost 20,000 years. Most of the art was produced by blowing streams of pulverized, colored rock in an aerosol through the mouth, using a hand or other object as a stencil against the cliff walls. The cliff here overhangs and provides protection from the elements. In awe-struck wonderment, I stare at the art, and I try to imagine almost 4,000 years ago, some dude sitting here blowing on his or her hand because I guess they had time to do so, and I guess they wanted to leave a mark of themselves on their world. Unfortunately, that latter sentiment persists in humanity today, as evidenced by the carved names and initials in the surrounding soft rock. We used the Big Bend camp as a base camp and settled in for a few days. The next day, Sunday, July 21st, we packed for a day trip up to Battleship Spur. Battleship Spur vaguely resembles the prow of a battleship, sticking like a finger perpendicular to the general aspect of the gorge. There are 3 layers to the gorge. At the bottom, it's defined by the river and cliffs about 150 feet high. And particularly in the side canyons, it's quite narrow. Then there's another layer of gradual vegetated slopes that lead to the second tier of 150-foot cliffs that are wide apart. We'd climb through Bawinda Creek Gorge and emerge in the second level, and then scramble up to the viewpoint. All this time we've been hiking on the floor of the gorge, so this is a very different perspective to see. From here, it just looks like a jagged slit in the landscape. It's quite stunning, really, and we take our time soaking it in, as the return trip is just back the way we came. Returning to the valley floor, I try my hand at a bit of ochre grinding, with the intention of perhaps creating my own art. But it's quite a bit of hard damn work to grind rock into powder by hand. I soon gave up on the idea with a new appreciation for these ancient people. The next day, Monday, July 22nd, we break camp and hike back to the main campground. On the way, we stop off at a place called the Art Gallery, aptly named for the cave art found there. And we also visit my favorite gorge of them all, Ward Canyon, which is home to the king fern, which looks exactly like a giant fern. There's also a waterfall falling into a beautiful tropical pool, inviting us to take a dip. We happily accepted the invitation. Arriving back at the campground of the kangaroos, footsore, tired, and hungry, we searched the waters for signs of a platypus, to no avail. While washing the dishes, we do spot a rock wallaby, though. The next morning, we leave this magical place in the nothingness of central Queensland, following the longest road ever back towards the east coast. We stop in Biloela to call ahead to our next destination, the Lazy Q Holiday Ranch, where we intend to do some horse riding. We stock up on food and drive on to reach the ranch at about 7:30 that evening. We fire up a wonderful steak dinner on Sid's wooden cook stove, and afterwards we find our space in the cobwebby old home-built bunkhouse. Yee-haw, partner! We're up early, and by 10, we're all saddled up and ready to ride. Sid leads the four of us and another French girl as we drive the cows to water and then go round up a bunch of horses from the hills. It's quite good fun riding around on a cantering horse, clinging on for dear life. Come back for lunch, and then we're back on the horses again with Dee, a woman who helps Sid out while his wife recovers from a fall off a horse. She shows us how to trot and canter, and then we have to go drive the milk cows back in for milking. It's real goddamn cowboy stuff, I'm telling you. I dismount, and I know I've had quite enough of horse riding. Turns out I have the shits and don't really feel well, so I go right to bed and skip dinner. On the plus side, I also miss out on the John Birch-type literature and conspiracy theory spewing madman that we have quite unwittingly wandered into. The Zionists and the Asiatics will make our children numbered slaves in an absolute dictatorship. This on a pamphlet that Sid helpfully hands to us. Good thing we're leaving tomorrow. We leave the Lazy Q and head for Rockhampton, the cattle capital of Queensland, if not all of Australia. We see signs that proclaim, "Where the beef meets the reef." Rockhampton is situated on the Tropic of Capricorn, so we're officially in the tropics now. We have decided to maroon ourselves, Robinson Crusoe style, on North Keppel Island for the weekend. We book a water taxi for tomorrow morning and then go food shopping. We pick up masks and snorkels and drive to Yepon and find a nice suitable place to camp, right on the beach, of course. We have dinner and crash. The next day, Friday, we spend a frantic morning preparing and packing supplies and loading it all onto the waiting boat, and then we're off with Captain Bob. A mere half hour later, Captain Bob deposits us on the shores of North Keppel Island with a promise to return on Monday. North Keppel Island is a national park and is surrounded by fringing coral reefs. Elliot and Mike set up camp in a little cove to the left as you look out to sea of Considine Beach, where we make camp near the facilities provided. It's pretty basic: picnic table, cold shower, drinking water, and toilet. We settle in, then go explore the island, walking around the coast to Eagle Rock, which proves to be aptly named as a pair of eagles gets very pissed off at us when we unwittingly approach their nest. We do some snorkeling and see a baby giant clam, but the reef here was very silted over and dying. We came back to the campsite and cooked up a big batch of spaghetti, and as it got dark, the possums come out. North Keppel Island, well, the Keppel Islands generally, are overrun with possums. And when I say overrun, I mean by the time we finished our spaghetti, we had to fend off the cheeky possums that would try to run in and steal some food right off of our plates. We had been warned that this would happen. To prevent loss of both our sleep and our food, we decided to store all the food in the enclosed concrete shower overnight. A fine plan it was, but work it did not. In the dark, we had not seen the drain hole for the shower, and the possums had accessed through that and made off with all of our bread and assorted and sundry food items. I blocked the hole up with some bricks and chalk up another one to experience. We'll have to get creative with our food supply over the next few days. We decided to move our tent, as these very inconsiderate local fisher people have arrived and pitched their tents right on top of ours. There are assholes all over the world. But we're determined that nothing's going to spoil our good time. We spend the day reading, writing, and snorkeling in the very nice and vibrant reef right off the cove. We see a stingray and a tasseled woebegone shark. It's very cool looking. We go fishing and catch a flounder and a couple of flathead. This is good because in addition to the food we lost, we discover that we forgot the giant bag of rice that we had bought. Luckily, this place is infested with a particularly voracious type of sandfly that is intent on rendering our flesh into bone. Otherwise, we'd have been concentrating on how hungry we were. We begin to wonder that this deserted island shit might not be all it's cracked up to be. We clean the fish and have it as an appetizer to our pasta and veggies. The next morning is Sunday, and we are invaded now by a fishing club out of Rockhampton. For a supposedly deserted island, this place seems to get a lot of traffic. It's not the first time that we've failed to consider days of the week when planning our adventures. But they give us a fish and tons of bait, and thankfully leave early. We spend the balance of the day snorkeling and fishing and vice versa. We get 2 trevally and 5 flathead, so we have augmented our dwindling food stock quite nicely, and we still have about half of the big box of pork that we brought as well. On Monday, Captain Bob shows up about mid-morning to ferry us back to Roslyn Bay, where we reunite with Stella, do a bit of organization, and drive into Rockhampton. We run errands, pick out a caravan park, what we would call a campground, and take a much-needed shower, and go out to the Criterion Hotel for a fine steak dinner. We drink 2 bottles of fine wine, and after dinner, headed to the bar for sambuca shots. We stagger back over the bridge to the caravan park and pass out. The next day is a road trip for 350 kilometers through nothingness to finally reach the beautiful town of Mackay. And here we somehow stumble into the Wiley Hotel, which provides us not only with booze, but also a $2 dinner. The $2 gets us a half a chicken and chips and veggies. It was so good, I had 2. We decided that we will go ahead and continue driving up to Airlie Beach tonight. So we did. On the way, the headlights of Stella started going out on me, which was really unnerving. We rarely drove after dark anyway for fear of hitting a kangaroo. And we do see a few kangaroos. And also a huge fire. Probably controlled. Hopefully controlled. We get into Whitsunday at about 10:30 that night, and we camp at a nice little park-looking place in Cannonvale. As it turns out, our spot was directly opposite the police station, but apparently there's no worries. We have our chai and boogie into Airlie Beach to check out the scene. It is a scene, too. Backpackers and yachties are everywhere. We park in the central lot and cruise around. We hit every dive shop and finally settle on Airlie Dive Center because an independent source told us that they have the nicest boat, and he was also the only guy to mention beers. Plus, they offer one more dive than the others, and we get to spend an extra night on the boat. We book it. I'm going to be certified open water for $395 and do as many as 9 dives, including 1 night dive. Greta's going to be certified advanced open water for $340 and will do as many as 12 dives, including 3 night dives. We're going to spend 3 nights and 3 days on the outer Great Barrier Reef aboard the MV Reef Enterprise. We won't go to Bait Reef, which is where everyone else around here goes. We will have Ferry Reef all to ourselves. I can't wait. One more hoop to jump through is a dive medical that Queensland requires of everyone wanting to get scuba certified. I passed with no problems. And then we make dinner in the lot, go out to Casey's to hear some good blues, and drink excellent brews and shots of Sambuca. We stumble back to the bus and park it by the Whitsunday Yacht Club. Elliot and Mike set up their tent, and we all fall down. Elliot and Mike are kicked out of their happy home by the Shire Council at 6 a.m. and have to retreat to the top of the bus. I wake hot and hungover, and life is very ugly. We have chai and move the bus back to the central lot and hang out with a vengeance. The dive course doesn't start until Sunday morning, so we have some time to kill. Lucky for us, by now, we have perfected our time-killing game to a professional level. Elliot decides he can't miss doing the scuba class either, so he signs up to join us. Another plus is that the humpback whales have arrived, and there's a good chance we'll get to see one or two. We spend the day hanging on the beach, and I finally catch up on my journal. We'll probably spend the night hanging out in the bus, and I can catch up on some letters. Ha! All the best laid plans, and the road to hell is paved with good intentions. We end up getting on the piss again. But we're not celebrating, we're drowning sorrows, because Elliot has failed his medical. Apparently he's got a bit of asthma, and that's an automatic disqualification in Queensland. Nothing to do, nowhere to go, forced to hang out in Airlie Beach for another 2 days. But I've spent longer time hanging out in worse places. Mike and Elliot have decided to look for a ride going north tomorrow. Mike because he has no money. Elliot because he can supposedly get a better or easier test for his asthma in Townsville. But who knows? Anyway, we spend the entire morning emptying all the nooks and crannies of Stella and sorting out the resultant mass of stuff and garbage. It is a bit of an overdue cleaning. And then we hold the sand down on the beach and look for green buds, to no avail. We are approached by people who inquire if we want a crew on one of the many sailboats languishing in the harbor, bound for various islands in the South Pacific. It is really tempting to think about, but practical matters like what will we do with Stella and how will we get back to Australia have us declining the invitation. We play some hacky sack on the beach and party in the parking lot with Nick and Bill and a couple we met from Canada who's also driving around in a van, Dave and Heidi. Dave's waiting to do his open water course with Barrier Reef Dive Services and is meanwhile hanging out in his van. Heidi and he are also planning on driving to Darwin and selling their car there. Another night on the piss drinking. The next day is Saturday, August 3rd. Elliot and Mike take off for Townsville at about 9 in a blue combi van with a very flat spare tire. I spent the rest of the day, you guessed it, hanging out. The mellow afternoon merged into a mellow night, and I went to bed early because I start my dive course tomorrow. I'm early arriving at Marine House, Airlie Beach, to begin my PADI open water diver certification. It's a bit of an anticlimax as we spend the entire day in the classroom. Boring. I meet an English couple, Paul and Janet, who are also driving around Australia in their Holden station wagon, and they're roughly following the same itinerary that we are. We will cross paths frequently, and when we fly home, we will stay with them in the UK on our way back. But right now, we're all going to get scuba certified together. The next day, we finally got in the pool, which was also a bit of an anticlimax, as the pool is butt-ass cold. I did get 100% on the first 2 quizzes. The day after that, we finished the pool work, and I passed the written test with a 94%. I missed 3 questions. We pack up and meet our boat, the Reef Enterprise, and sail out to Blue Pearl Bay just off of Hayman Island in the Whitsunday group. I'm awakened at 6:30 a.m. by the engines as we motor off to Ferry Reef. We arrive there at about 9:30, and I get my first glimpse of the Great Barrier Reef. We are out here. I can't see any land. Only the closest Whitsunday Islands are barely visible on the horizon. But the reef is clearly visible, even from above the water. It is a rare, glassed-out day on the reef. There is no breeze and no waves. We anchor in 15 meters of water, and we could see fish on the bottom. We suit up and do some snorkeling. Dave Hyde is our faithful instructor, and he was trained by the Royal Marines, so he affords little to no bullshit from his students, but still manages to be a great guy at night. He sends Greta off on the first of her advanced certification dives, and meanwhile Dave takes out the first group of open water students while the rest of us go snorkeling. Snorkeling is so amazing, it's hard to believe that the diving is going to be even better, but of course it is. We do our few little exercises and then go for a great little bubble for 20 minutes through the coral wonderland. After lunch, Greta does her compass navigation dive, and then Dave takes the first group of open water for their second dive, and we go snorkeling. Then we do our second dive and a few exercises. Meanwhile, Greta's out on her third, a pleasure dive. We come back and have a shower while most everyone goes for a snorkel to see Henry, the friendly giant clam. Sunset over the ocean, and the lasagna starts baking as Greta suits up for her fourth dive of the day, a required night dive. There are a couple of giant turtles that are the highlight of that dive. Then dinner, beers, and a slideshow. As we drift off to sleep, and as I write this, Paul has just caught a small 5-foot gray whaler shark on a hand line off the stern. A bit of excitement ensues while the poor bastard flops around on the bottom of the deck trying to bite people's feet off. Anyway, it's been a long day and I'm going to bed because I'll do my final 2 certification dives tomorrow morning, and then I'll be able to do another dive in the afternoon and then a night dive. Thursday, August 8th, is another gorgeous day in paradise. First mate Craig makes sure everyone is up very early. He takes a particular and perverse pleasure in this, and I'm a bit grumpy about it. But Linda serves up the never-ending breakfast and coffee, and I quickly readjust my attitude. I mean, we're anchored on a boat on the Great Barrier Reef, and we're scuba diving, right? We pull the anchor and motor off to Tina's Arm to do some excellent snorkeling over the reef flat, followed by another great dive, our third certification dive, which led us through some tight crevices. My buddy Rebecca catches her LP hose on one bit of protruding coral, and I go back and help her through. We swim parallel with a big school of barracuda for a while. All in all, it's an excellent dive, and we even aced the buddy breathing exercise. After snacks on board the Reef Enterprise, we motor off to Craig's Crevice, where we see a huge grouper on our fourth and final certification dive. The coral here was the best ever. It's an elaborate underwater garden, blue staghorn, cabbage corals, plate, soft coral, in between with colorful marine life all around. The works. We eat lunch and then motor back to the lagoon for our first solo dive. Rebecca, Matt, and I went down. We saw a huge lobster, and Matt found a beautiful cowrie shell. We got low on air, and I tried to indicate the way back to the boat, but no one believed me, so we had a long snorkel on the way back. After a suitable surface interval, we prepared for our first night dive. Greta and South African Dave, we call him South African Dave to distinguish him from Canadian Dave, who's in the van with Heidi. Anyway, they went off on their own, being all advanced certified and all that. The other 10 of us went down together. Everyone was dragging their feet, not wanting to jump in the dark water. So I was the first one in and the first one to the bottom. And when everyone else finally jumped in and descended, with lights flashing all over the place, it looked like a scene out of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If there were any large sea life in the area, they were long gone by now. We did, however, see a large turtle and scared the shit out of it, and he beat it out of there. We surfaced to an excellent meal of roast pork and have a few beers, and then a few more, and then it's off to a good night's sleep. The wind is expected to pick up tonight, but right now the sea is calm and the weather's beautiful. We wake up to choppy seas and a brisk breeze. Craig is anxious to get back and cruises us over to Sarah's Pocket, where he rushes us all into the water. Greta, South African Dave, and I are buddies, but although we're the first in the water, we're the last to surface. We are harassed by a remora, or suckerfish, which wants to latch onto us. Okay, me, literally. I use half my air fighting it off. It was a good dive, even though the visibility was down a bit. Then we motor over to Henry's Balmy for our final dive. And this time, Greta, Dave, and I are the first down, and we say hi to Henry the giant clam. He's purple and about the size of a Volkswagen Bug. We had a great dive. Instructor Dave takes a picture of us, and we see a large school of mother-in-law fish. Later, we learn that they're called mother-in-law fish because they taste awful, so you give them to your mother-in-law. Instructor Dave has found a large lobster and brings him up, but he's cut his hand. We're in the boat, but there's still others in the water, and we keep an eye out for sharks. When everyone's back in the boat, Craig immediately pulls the anchor, turns for shore, and opens up the throttles. As soon as we leave the protection of the reef and are in deeper water, the sea starts heaving. Waves up to 3 meters are coming over the bow, and most of the dive group is beginning to look a little pale. It's a long few hours back, and first Paul, then Janet, then Kylie, then Matt, all talk to Huey. It's a clearance sale of Buicks off the stern and over the side, wherever you could find a spot. We enjoy a beer and help ourselves to their share of the huge luncheon of sandwich meats, and then go lay down. We make it back to Airlie Beach, where we unload our stuff, pick up Stella, and meet everyone back in the parking lot. And then my journal says, we go out to the Hog's Breath Saloon for a great meal of prime rib. We head over to Bongo Congo for a beer or two, and end up at KC's for a nightcap. The next day we leave Airlie Beach and cruise north to Townsville, where we find the whole town is in hiding or something. No one's about. We get dinner and a box of wine and meet Dave, Sheila, and Heidi up on Castle Hill, where we all decide to go to the drive-in. We get in for $6 on our student card, and we see Robin Hood and Narrow Margin. We have beans and rice for dinner and drink wine, and when it was all over, we couldn't find a place to sleep, so we park at the Breakwater Marina, where we are awakened at 6 a.m. by a guy banging on our door shouting, "Wakey, wakey!" This is the first time this has happened since we started traveling and sleeping in Sheila. To be fair, it's probably because we were parked on the marina property, we think. We move the bus around the corner, and after making plans to meet the Canadians at the market, we go back to sleep and wake up later to have tea and go to the market. I see a great didgeridoo for $80, but don't buy it. We see Paul and Janet and meet up with Dave and the gals. We all go to the most excellent dive shop, Mike Ball Dive Expeditions. These guys are the Rolls Royce of dive trips. When we win the lotto, this is where we'll go to spend it. Meanwhile, we'll just drool. After suitably drooling for a while, we make plans to meet everyone on Magnetic Island, and then head off to Rose Bay Caravan Park, where we spend the afternoon doing old dishes, laundry, and cleaning Stella. It's kind of nice with just the two of us in the van now, but then again, expenses just doubled. We spend the evening catching up on our reading, ready to start tomorrow with a fresh, clean slate. We wake up and the weather's pretty shitty out, cloudy and windy. We go to American Express to take care of the car registration, Rego in Australian. And the form is not there, just a note from Martin saying that he needs the registration number. I give him a call and he says to just send him $139 and he'll mail it back to us in cans. Cool. So I go to the bank and take some money out for the van registration, and then run errands to the post office, and talked to some other dive shops other than Mike Ball, they all concur that the winds are going to be up all week and visibility at Magnetic Island will be marginal. So we decided to blow it off and motor north towards Cairns. We fill up with cheap 59-cent per liter petrol and go food shopping. On the way out of town, we buy a new battery for Stella for $78, which I hope will solve the flickering headlight problem. We cruise up the road to Cardwell and get some road brews from what my journal describes as a brain-dead pub. Once again, I find myself scratching my head at my 30 years ago self and wish I could just get some fucking elaboration, because I'm sure there's a story there, but it's long gone now. We camp at a rest area just north of town where I make my chili. It's been raining and drizzling all day, so it's a chilly kind of day. Apparently, we have now crossed into the wet tropics. We're in bed by 10. We're up early again the next morning, as has lately been our custom. Early to bed, early to rise, and all that. We drive the last hour into Cairns and immediately get a bad first impression when some guy yells at us, calling us fucking tourists. Well, yeah. Hello. Doesn't seem to be much to do here anyway. Pretty much a cheesy tourist trap. Kind of like Myrtle Beach, if Myrtle Beach had the Great Barrier Reef. But we have fun when we go to collect our mail. We have heaps of it. I have a package waiting for me at General Delivery that turns out to be new shoes for me from Michael Hanley. Excellent. By the way, for the podcast listeners, the town of Cairns is spelled like a rock cairn, C-A-I-R-N-S, but in Australianese it is pronounced like cans of soup. We go to the tourist information office and try to make sense of the bewildering array of dive trips and services. We decide to walk a few blocks down the street and check out the Nimrod 3, which sails between Cooktown and Lizard Island. They offer 4 days of diving with flights over the reef for $750, $650 if you book a week in advance, and $550 if you book 24 hours in advance. For an extra $100, I can get my advanced open water certification. We say, what the hell, we're here. Who knows when we're ever going to be back, so we go for it, and we book for next Tuesday. When we leave, we feel a little woozy from spending so much money so fast. I sure hope we win the lotto tomorrow night. Yeah, surprise, surprise, spoiler alert, we don't. We make plans to spend the next week waiting for our dive trip north of Cairns in the area around Port Douglas and Daintree National Park, which is a World Heritage Site. We stop by a fruit and veggie market and boogie out of town to the bottle shop, where we get beer, wine, and port to celebrate. Gotta cover all the bases, you know. We find a beautiful, secluded camping spot about 15 miles north of town on the beach and almost get Stella stuck in the sand while pulling into it. We make an excellent meal with prawns and veggies and rice and while away the evening reading and writing letters. It's very relaxing to have only 2 people on the bus. Wednesday, August 14th, we wake up and have tea and pull out of our spot with no trouble and cover the few remaining miles to Port Douglas quickly. The road here is probably the most scenic on the entire east coast of Australia. Port Douglas itself seems to be the West Palm Beach of this coast, with palms and golf courses and condos everywhere. We drive to the main beach and chill while I try to catch up on the interminable letters I'm behind on. I do well, too. 5 letters and 4 postcards. Only 5 more letters and I'll be all caught up. We drive along the main drag and then to the top of Flagstaff Hill and play some hacky sack. Around dark, we go to the bottle shop again and buy a slab of Cairns Draft and make a reservation at Bandito's Mexican restaurant, which proves to be good, but definitely not great, and it's very expensive. Oh well, we have several beers and pull the van up by the beach and crash. The next morning, we make our tea and head up the road towards the Daintree River and the end of the paved road. I mean the end of the paved road on the entire east coast of Australia, okay? But we're determined to take Stella to Cape Tribulation. So we cross the Daintree River on the ferry, being aware of crocodiles, and start through the rainforest on dirt roads. But the road's really not that bad, and we make Cape Tribulation with no problem. Unfortunately, it's not very exciting, except for the very primeval rainforest everywhere. Cape Tribulation was so named by Captain Cook when his ship struck a reef in the area, which eventually led to them grounding on another reef. Cape Tribulation marked the furthest that we drove Stella up the east coast of Australia, over 1,700 miles from Sydney, the equivalent of driving from Miami, Florida to Bangor, Maine. We run into Paul and Janet, and we all go down to Noah Bay to camp for the night. We see a large lace monitor lizard on the road hanging out by the toilets. And then who should show up at our little campsite but none other than Canadian Dave and Heidi. They take the next spot over and we make a night of it. A couple of furious games of Pass the Pigs on Paul's rug. Much port and beer and wine is consumed, and a fine time was had by all. Such are memories made, if only one was able to remember them more clearly. Oh well. Friday, August 16th. Well, I can't say we were up early, but after Paul and Janet left, and Dave and Heidi checked out Cape Tribulation and came back and got us, the four of us headed back towards the ferry, stopping off at the Botanical Walk on the way. We drove right onto the ferry and went directly to Mossman Gorge, where I went for a swim, and then we all took a little walk through the rainforest and saw the mother of all trees. We left the gorge, got fish and chips, and found a nice camp on the beach on the Cairns to Mossman Road. The next morning, we're up early again, or we go into Cairns to the American Express for mail, and find a letter from Elliot that said he had blown town and gone to Sydney, then on to Melbourne, and then Tasmania, and after that was traveling back to California with Mike. So they're off the bus for good, and it's just the two of us now. We go shopping and found a note from South African Dave on Stella. He's in town. We actually ran into him in the supermarket, and he was psyched to do the Nimrod 3 trip. So we go back to the dive shop, but it's all booked up. We take him back to the backpacker hostel where he's staying, and he gave us some good photos of us that he took on the Reef Enterprise trip. Some good shots, too. We made plans to meet him tomorrow, and then drove up to the caravan park in Kuranda and had a much-needed shower and sausages on the Barbie, followed by a Yahtzee night with Heidi and Dave, who are also in the same park. Sunday, August 18th. This is the day our car registration expires. We're up early and I checked the valves on the van. A side note, I have owned many previous Volkswagen vehicles and was well versed in VW maintenance procedures. The valves were fine, but the distributor cap is a bit fouled, so I cleaned that off. Then we go to Kuranda to the market in search of a SEPA sack, a hacky sack type thing that I wanted, but I had no luck finding one. We watched the bungee jumpers, and that was kind of fun. And then around noon, we went to the Kabuki Dance Theater and saw the show there. It was very well done. A good insight to Aboriginal culture. Matt, Paul, Janet, and then South African Dave and Rebecca. The gang's all here. We go back to the caravan park and take a shower and drive down to another camp on the beach on the Cairns Mossman Road. We made burritos and hung out, sewing, reading, and whatnot. Ready to go back into Cairns tomorrow. Hopefully the registration is there. And yes, the next day the registration arrives just as the old one had run out. The new one shows up. Perfect timing. The day is spent running errands, gearing up to go on the dive trip tomorrow. We have to plan ahead also because we'll be coming back to Cairns next Saturday and hope to leave on Sunday for the Outback. So we have to wrap things up here on the east coast of Australia. I get a new old tire for Stella. We set up appointment for our malaria pills for Indonesia, and we go back to our little spot by the beach and camp. Tuesday, August 20th. This is the day we've been waiting for. We pack up our film, malaria pills for Indonesia, and redirect all of our mail to Darwin. We finished with enough time to stop off at the RSL Club to prime ourselves for the short flight on the small plane. Side note here, the RSL Club is the Retired Services League, and sort of like the VFW in the States, but a lot more fun. And in a lot of these little small towns, it's really the best place to do your drinking. Yeah, hot tip. Anyway, we chugged down a surprising amount of beer and even managed a shot of Sambuca. And then we meet the group at 2:30 at Down Under Dive Shop. It seems to be largely comprised of yuppie Americans. Steve is an attorney, and there's a vascular surgeon and his wife named Richard and Jennifer. The honeymooners, Richard, call me Rick, and somebody, all my journal has is a not very helpful question mark, so I feel like we didn't see much of them. And then there's Sue Ellen and her daughter, who are quintessential New Yorkers. The two Australians, Allison and Peter, must have felt quite outnumbered. God knows what all these folks thought of us two vagabonds, but we didn't much care. We were going to see how the other half lived for a few days. Turns out that most of these folks are from the D.C. area, and Richard, the doctor, actually went to UVA Medical School. We go to the airport on the shop's bus and board the plane for the short flight to Cooktown. We don't get to see much, just pretty much follow the coast up. We're met at the airport by the bus for the Sovereign Hotel, where we're meant to stay. All this is included. Cooktown turns out to be an interesting little town. It is only reached by a long drive over 200 kilometers of rough dirt road, really a four-wheel drive track, or by plane. We check into our very nice hotel room and stop by the bottle shop on our way to check out the classic old graveyard on the edge of town. Here we see many old graves and meet an old woman and her dog who tend them. Cooktown has the honor of being the first white settlement in Australia, when Captain Cook repaired his ship here for 43 days in 1770. We come back to the hotel and swim in its beautiful pool while sipping some Cooper's Stout. We shower and go to dinner at the Endeavour Inn, which claimed to specialize in seafood. We are fully in 5-star adventure mode now, and order an excellent meal of prawns, Moreton Bay bugs, mud crab, and coral trout, all washed down with fine wines. The mud crab is as big as my head, but I eat it anyway. The only bummer is that even though we have reservations, we have to wait for a table. This is normally a good sign, but in our case, simply forces us to drink at the bar. However, on a scale of bummers, 1 being not so bummed and 10 being a total bummer, this is really a 0 bummer. So, by the time we left, we were well and truly pissed. The next morning is Wednesday, August 21st, and we're up at dawn to meet the van to the Nimrod, where we get at 7 a.m. We walk past the spot where Captain Cook landed on the Australian continent, and then board the Nimrod 3 and settle in our cabin. The Nimrod 3 is a 65-foot catamaran with a wide 26-foot beam, and she accommodates 16 passengers. The crew has prepared a huge breakfast for us, and after that we got underway, following the ribbon reefs north towards Lizard Island, about 100 kilometers away. Thus begins the Nimrod liveaboard routine. Someone will wake you up and press a cup of hot coffee in your hand and usher you ever so gently into your dive gear. You hit the water half asleep, but when you surface 40 minutes later, you're wide awake and hungry. The Nimrod crew knows this, and they have prepared a huge breakfast with waffles and eggs and bacon and sausage and toast and muffins and pastry. If anything was missing, I didn't notice it. While we eat, the boat is moving to the next dive site, and once we're anchored, we do dive number 2. When we come up, there's a huge luncheon laid out for us. While we eat, they move the boat again, and then we drop anchor for the afternoon. We do dive number 3, and when we come up, there's a huge dinner waiting. After dinner, if you wait to have a beer, you can do a night dive. In any case, snacks are available afterwards, and then the bar is open. We motor out for about 4 hours to Ribbon Reef number 4, where I go in for my first advanced open water certification dive, which would be natural navigation. Nothing special really. We spent the entire time diving on our activities. They moved the boat to Ribbon Reef number 5, and I do compass navigation at No Name Reef, where I completely botch my squares and see a big potato cod with a fish hook in his mouth. Scott, our instructor, never even saw me screw up my squares, as he was too busy trying to make time with Emma, an English girl on the trip. We had continuing problems with him and his lackadaisical attitude. After dinner that night, we all go in for a night dive. We don't see anything special, but I have trouble with my air and come up with 50 bar. It seems that when Norm, the non-diving skipper, checked my air supply while we were giant striding off the back of the boat, he turned the valve the wrong way, and it was nearly completely off. When I got to 50 bar and I inhaled, the gauge went to 0, and I couldn't get a breath. It was quite discouraging. Thursday, August 22nd. What a drag to wake up and get in the water at 8 a.m. Today I'm doing my deep dives. And we go deep, all right. Too deep. 39 meters at Andy's postcard on Ribbon Reef number 5. Greta gets narked. Nitrogen narcosis is a drunken-like feeling experienced by divers at extreme depths. I don't feel it, and I'm a bit disappointed. We eat breakfast, and they move the boat to Harrier Reef, and we do a pleasure dive at Cuttlefish Cove, where we see a small, very scared-looking shark. Then we have lunch and move to Ribbon Reef number 9 1/3 to a dive site known as the Fish Tank. The dive ends in a nasty current, and 6 of the other divers have to be rescued in the Zodiac as they're on their way to Fiji. We managed to make it back to the boat on our own, and we feel quite superior about it. The night dive that evening in Challenger Bay is one of the best. First, there's a huge potato cod just hanging out right under the boat, and then coming around the coral bommy, we quite literally come face to face with a large 5 or 6 foot reef shark who keeps on coming at us and checks us out quite thoroughly. Experience gives us both the willies. We go the opposite way and see a blue spotted stingray, a painted crayfish, and a barracuda, who I soon learn will follow my dive light and target the fish that I illuminate. All in all, an excellent dive and worthy of a few celebratory beers. The next morning we dive at Pixie Pinnacle, which I find disappointing given the build-up to it and the reality of the dead coral we find there. I'm disappointed by the famed Cod Hole dive site also. We do 3 dives here, and the only thing there are bloody giant potato cod, which are cool, don't get me wrong, but once you've seen a couple of giant fish submarines, you're like, oh, okay, where's all the small stuff? Honestly, I don't think it even needs a couple. One good big-ass fish and I'm good. Potato cod, check. Because minus the giant fish, the site is like diving on the moon, just desolate. We do 1 drift dive, which is quite fun, but too short. Ho-hum. We motor in towards Lizard Island and start the session. We drink heaps of beer and bourbon and play Nintendo Game Boy games and watch videos and pass out at 2 a.m. Next day, we're up early to do our last dive in Watson's Bay on Lizard Island. A maximum depth of only 7 meters, but loads of soft coral, and we see 2 very big, very inquisitive cuttlefish. They are checking us out with large, very intelligent-seeming eyes. They're flashing, pulsing different colors throughout their body, and propelling themselves effortlessly by squirting water around. Amazing. They shadow us for the entire dive, but will not allow us to approach them. That might just be the coolest fucking thing I've ever seen in my life. We have our breakfast and shower and pack up to leave the boat and fly back to Cairns. We disembark onto Lizard Island, which is home to both a 5-star luxury resort popular with movie and rock stars, and also a scientific research station. It also has an airport suitable for small planes. Richard, the surgeon, has been seasick every single night and is forfeiting his return trip to come back with us on the plane. The crew offers his spot to one of us, but since we can't both go, we pass. The flight back is a highlight of the trip. We have to fly low across the Barrier Reef, and the pilot lets us come into the cockpit and points out some sights along the way, like the abandoned hippie commune ship foundered on the reef. I even see a giant manta ray swimming peacefully. A perfect ending to an excellent trip, even though the sites we visited were probably not the best, and we felt like we were coddled all the time. We really weren't used to being looked after like that. We get back to Cairns, and it felt odd to be back in civilization again. We find a note on Stella from South African Dave and meet up with him and Rebecca at the supermarket of all places. We buy a slab of Cairns Draft and get fish and chips and become quite pissed. We climb into Stella and sleep in the hostel parking lot. The next morning we leave Cairns and drive up to the market in Coranda, looking fruitlessly for a Sipa sack. Then it was on the road for us to drive all the way from the Atherton Tableland down Route 1 to Route 62 and 63 to Charters Towers. We stopped and had lunch at this cool crater in the rainforest called Kinrara Crater. We nearly ran out of petrol before we reached Charters Towers, and as it was a Sunday and we had just come off the boat, we had no cash and we had to charge the gas. The road to Charters Towers is all single lane with wide shoulders for 350 kilometers. Desolation. Nothing. Bloody boring. Put a brick on the accelerator and tie down the steering wheel and go climb in the back. We keep driving another 100 kilometers out of Charters Towers before finally pulling over in a rest area and popping the top. There is nothing out here. We are on our way into the outback, and that is another story. So that's it for this time. I thank y'all for listening, and we'll see you next time, somewhere down the road.